What did Ellen White think of this gospel sickle when she read it? Well, she said in 1888, she says, "A pain comes to my heart every time I see the sickle. I say it is not as God would have it. If Satan can get in dissension among us as a people, he will only be too glad." Another thing, so that was we're looking here at the loaded atmosphere of 1888. Another thing that was an element of the atmosphere was the imminent Sunday law on a national level in 1888. Now this happened through, it goes back to the American Civil War. In 1863, a coalition of 11 Protestant denominations from 7 states, they gathered together to discuss the state of the nation. And they believed that the American Civil War was in judgment because of the iniquity that was happening on the land. And so they gathered together and said, we have to make this nation a Christian nation and God will bless us. And they campaigned and then later they formed themselves into what they called the National Reform Association. And this National Reform Association later joined with the Women's Temperance Movement, which was a big organization in America at the time. And they made proposed an amendment to the Constitution formally recognizing America as a Christian nation with a Christian government. If you read the actual amendment proposed, it's very clear. Now these proposals grew stronger and stronger towards the 1880s and in the 1890s. In 1888, one of the senators named Blair proposed a bill. Now at the time, America had 60 million people in 1888. 15 million of those signed a petition supporting a national Sunday rest bill. Can you imagine living at that time? This was what was happening right towards the end of the year 1888, where God on the one hand is bringing a message that would result in the loud cry of the third angel, the latter rain. And on the other hand, Satan is gathering his forces and preparing to battle against God's people. That was the atmosphere of 1888. That petition, that bill was actually worded like this. If you read down the bottom here, bill to secure to the people the enjoyment of the first week, commonly known as the Lord's Day, as a day of rest, and to promote its observance as a day of religious worship. Fully fulfilled the description of prophecy, both in the Bible and also in the spirit of prophecy. Cardinal James Gibbons joins with this movement of Sunday legislation in America and says, "I am most happy to add my name to those of the millions of others who are laudably contending against the violation of the Christian Sabbath by unnecessary labour." So he joins his support, and so the Protestants and Catholics unite in this push for Sunday legislation at the end of 1888. Well, just a few days before, God's people were in Minneapolis fighting the old pioneer ministry who held a certain view against Wagner. They were rejecting the light that God had sent them that would prepare them to give the loud cry. It's so unfortunate that this happened. Ellen White wrote that they were controlled by a spirit of Pharisaism. This was a spirit which burdened her, she wrote, because he was so unlike the spirit of Jesus. And then she wrote a number of things that they engaged in, like sarcasm and jesting, calling Wagner Sister White's pet, constant carping criticism, fault-finding, nitpicking, envy, evil surmising, hatred, jealousy, intoxicated with the spirit of resistance and spirit of contention and debate, playing upon words, etc. Ellen White saw it all because God showed it to her behind the scenes what was happening at this conference. This was the spirit that existed there in Minneapolis. Now, another issue, so you had the Galatians controversy, the National Sunday Law, and then there was this debate over the 10 kingdoms. Uriah Smith, as you know, wrote the book Daniel and Revelation, and in that book, in the early edition, the first edition, he wrote that one of the 10 horns was the Huns. And Jones decided to investigate this, and he realized that the 10 horns didn't include the Huns, he actually included the Alemanni. And he proved it through history, historical sources, and he published this view. Again, it was seen to be an attack upon the pillars of the faith, on the historical view of the SDA Church. Another thing that was happening was what became known as the California Conspiracy, because C.H. Jones, W.C. White, Ellen White's son, E.J. Wagner and A.T. Jones, just prior to the 1888 General Conference, they met for a few weeks. Now, the reason they met was so that they could study the scriptures together and compare ideas and thoughts and come to sound conclusions. That was the reason they met. It wasn't a conspiracy. Ellen White was not present. But unfortunately, the Old Pioneer Ministry got word of it by a man named Healy, who wrote to them about what he thought was a conspiracy in preparation to bring these ideas and introduce them into the 1888 General Conference. So that was the dynamic. You had the Galatians controversy, the imminent Sunday Law, the 10 Kingdoms debate, and the California Conspiracy. But in reality, behind all that, what was actually, who were the forces battling? Christ and Satan. You had a battle between orthodoxy, which is an attitude of, we've been teaching this for 40 years, we're not going to change. If we've been right for 40 years, nothing can prove us wrong. That's orthodoxy, which was Pharisaism. Guardians of doctrine versus investigation of the Bible. Orthodoxy versus advancing truth. Pharisaism versus the Spirit of Christ, and righteousness by works versus righteousness by faith. That was the key issue in 1888. That is what actually happened. October 17 to November 4 were the dates of the actual meetings of the conference. So let's briefly look at them now. In August 5th of 1888, a few months prior, Ellen White wrote to the delegates of that conference with these words. She says, "Dear brethren who shall assemble at the General Conference, we are impressed that this gathering will be the most important meeting you have ever attended. This should be a period of earnestly seeking the Lord and humbling your hearts before Him." Unfortunately now, George Butler couldn't be present at the meeting because he was very, very sick. He became very ill and he couldn't attend, although he would have loved to have been there to oppose the, as he called the fledglings. But he couldn't be present. However, he sent regular telegrams to the delegates of 1888 to stand by the old landmarks. And what were the old landmarks in his head? Galatians 3, 14 and 15. The law is the ceremonial law. Right, so these and the covenants, he had other ideas on the covenants and things. So these were, to him, in his mind, they were the old landmarks. But Ellen White got word of this and set the thing straight. She says, she explained what the old landmarks were. It had nothing to do with these two issues. So